The U.S. is now imposing a blockade on Iran's blockade. So how does that work? And will it be effective? Also, what does this mean for the ceasefire and potential peace talks? Here to break it all down, Fox News strategic analyst General Jack Keane is with us. General, great to have you. We know that the Iranians have mined the Strait of Hormuz. We know that we have minesweepers there. We know that the president has a main purpose, and that is to prevent the Iranians from selling any oil, to pretty much bankrupt them. My question from a strategic standpoint is, how do we enforce this and keep our Navy safe at the same time?
Yeah, well, there's two phases to this operation, and you're seeing the first phase right now, which is the blockade itself. And the way that's working is CENTCOM has established a radio communication net that all ships trying to leave or arrive in the Gulf area will communicate with them. And as you indicated, if their intent is to pick up Iranian oil or transport it out, they're not allowed to do that, and we'll tell them where to park. If they test it, in other words, they come from the north, from Karg Island likely, and they want to sail through the straits, and they're not responding to the guidance that CENTCOM is telling them, then we will board that ship. And we'll probably do it with Marines from helicopters, or we can do it from a seaborne as well. The fact is, people are not going to be able to get that oil out of there. That is a fact. And that is how this blockade will work. But here's the other piece to it, and why there has to be a phase two. Remember that the reason the merchant ships are not coming, these are the non-Iranian merchant ships, which are allowed to come now, and we'll see after 24, 48 hours if they're coming, they are likely not going to come. And why is that? Because of the intimidation and coercion of Iran in the past has threatened them, and they still may not want to move. And so the second phase of this operation, and the president has given a warning order to Admiral Cooper to do just what I'm about to say, and that is, one, clear the Straits of Hormuz, and you saw a couple of ships doing that over the weekend, and you mentioned it in the introduction, to get the mines that may be in that area out, and we have underwater drones trying to identify some of these mines that the Iranians planted that are not tied to anything, and they lost control of them. So that will be done, and then we have to secure the Straits of Hormuz, and then also escort transit through the Straits of Hormuz. That will take some time to do that, but that will certainly block any intimidation or coercion that Iran still may have on the merchant owners of its ships, and who don't want to send the ships down there. They don't want to lose their crews, and they certainly don't want to lose their ship. So there's two phases to this operation, and it's estimated that while we'll start the escort, Sean, at some point we would turn that over to allies and partners. And there are sufficient allies gathering to come. Despite their initial reluctance, they're finally getting into this thing, and that will take place over time. Now, if negotiations work out and Iran is willing to agree to everything, and remember, President Trump said everything, and listen, I have complete confidence here in what I refer to as the backstop, and that is President Trump. He is the backstop here. Nobody on our side is going to make any deal in terms of the specifics without checking with him, and he's going to make sure he's getting everything that he wants here, and he has laid that out time and time and time again. So I got confidence in that. And part of that, if there is a deal, would be Iran would open up the passageway so transit can take place. And remember, two things here. Iran can have ships transit through, but they can't control it. They don't designate who can move through or when they move through, and certainly no toll arrive. They have got to back off completely. The United States backs off completely at some point, and the Straits of Hormuz is open to the Sea of Law Bible, that is free transit through the Straits of Hormuz, and nobody controlling it. That is the end state here.
It seems to me, General, that that would be very achievable for the U.S. Navy, especially because we are not going to actually create a blockade where our Navy, at its narrowest point, the Strait of Hormuz is, what, 20, 24 miles wide. that would make our ships probably a fairly easy target. We would not give them that, quote, moral victory that they would have in their eyes. It's going to be at whatever point we decide we would board any ship that picked up any oil from the Iranians, Iranian oil, probably Cargill, and I think you're probably correct about that. So the blockade is going to be very different than putting the U.S. Navy in harm's way in any way. Now let's go to the other issue that has been the major sticking point, and that is the 460 kilograms of enriched uranium. I've gotten mixed messages from people that are very smart. Some say that we have eyes on it at all times. There's no need to go in there and extract it if they don't hand it over. We can entomb it even further to make it that much more difficult for them to ever get near it. What are your thoughts? And I know for the president, I know that he has said weeks, not months, that this conflict will come to an end. Do you see that still being achievable, even if the blockade stays in effect?
Oh, it's very achievable, and it's something that has to be achieved. It's not achieved by negotiation. Listen, I don't believe for a minute that President Trump would leave office and leave 1,000 pounds of nuclear, highly enriched uranium capable of 60% enrichment, capable of being a dirty bomb today if it was used. That's a conventional bomb with radiation associated with it, and with the potential of it being weaponized very quickly. I don't believe President Trump would ever consider leaving office after that. He's going to get that out of there one way or the other. He's either going to get it through negotiations, or another way to get it is Cargill itself. 90% of the distribution of all their oil goes through Cargill. Right now, none of that is working. At some point, we can say to the Iranians, listen, you let us come in and take the nuclear, highly enriched uranium out of there. We'll do it ourselves, and we'll make sure it's out of there, or else you're going to lose Cargill. Either we're going to take control of it completely, or we're going to blow it up. And that is coercion and intimidation, to be sure. I'm absolutely convinced that President Trump is not going to leave nuclear dust there where we can't keep surveilling it. And every once in a while, when they make a move on it, we have to go in there and conduct another airstrike. And that could be going on periodically. I don't see that in the cards, nor do I see them even in a nuclear deal letting them have any kind of enriched uranium, even the lower grade. Why? Because they lie and they cheat. And, you know, a little bit grows into a lot. We have already seen that take place in dealing with these guys. Whenever we're dealing with the Iranians, we got to know, and the president and his team knows this, these guys are liars and cheaters, and that has been their operandi for almost 50 years now. And they're masters at this stuff. But they are back on their heels now. You can see that in the negotiations. Sean, I think they underestimated where President Trump really is. When they got the ceasefire and the war stopped because of the Straits of Hormuz, I thought they believed that the United States is in a much weakened position and will go in there to these negotiations, and they will be in a situation where they're going to bend to our will and let us do some of the things we want to do. And President Trump said, no way, we're not doing any of that whatsoever. As a matter of fact, while they're negotiating, he's sailing 2 ships through the Straits of Hormuz, making the first pass through there on a way to actually clearing the whole Straits of Hormuz eventually. And then, of course, we saw what happened right after that, and that's ordering the blockade itself. They know who they're dealing with now. If they had any doubts whatsoever, they absolutely know who they're dealing with. He's not going to be intimidated.
They've got to know that they're next on the list of individuals to be targeted, even though they're the 4th and 5th tier leadership. General Keane, always great to have you. Appreciate your insight. Thank you, sir.
Be sure to like and subscribe for all the Fox News latest on YouTube, and catch full shows streaming now on Fox One.